1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2.
Klaus Voormann was a young man walking down the street in Hamburg, Germany's red light district one night in 1960 when he was drawn into a club by the music that would change his life. That's because it was Klaus's first time hearing rock and roll live, and because the band on stage that night was the Beatles. Klaus not only became fast friends with the group, he would in later years play bass on John, George, and Ringo's most critically acclaimed solo records. And he became a much sought-after session player for artists like Carly Simon, Harry Nilsson, and Jerry Lee Lewis. But Klaus's remarkable career in rock and roll wasn't limited to just musical collaborations. It was 50 years ago this year that Klaus created the album cover for the Beatles' Revolver. I recently chatted with Klaus about his iconic design, meeting the Beatles, and what it was like in Hamburg 1960, all those years ago.
Well, the thing was, they had this band coming up on stage, like everybody knows, they have to plug in their instruments, and they just were messing around a little, and they said hello to the audience, and Guten Tag, wie geht's? They were speaking a little German, which was very sweet. And then they started playing, and Pete Best sitting at the drums, and then, good golly, Miss Marley, they would start with a rock and roll song, and it was just, it hit me like a rocket, just incredible. And it went on because it was not just the one song, each song, and even when it went down a little slow song, George was singing lovely little songs like Henry VIII I Am, or something like that, which nobody really knew what the song was, and they didn't. Most of the people in the club didn't understand the lyrics, but they played for people to dance. It was not a show. It was just a dance club. People came there to swing their legs,
And how did you go from being a spectator and somebody who appreciated what they were doing to actually becoming a friend of theirs?
Because they were so special, and it actually happened that you saw that the people did not just dance and ignore the band. They actually looked up on stage and said, oh, look at his face. And Astrid was saying, look at John's eyes, the almond-shaped eyes, or look at his nostrils. And saying, oh, doesn't George look cute? Mm-hmm. So this started to happen. And at the same time, I know that more from people saying it later, that they actually did the same to us. Who are those people that are coming in? Oh, look at those scarves they're wearing. And they were getting excited about us. But we weren't aware of that. But they said, and one day they said, Klaus, you have to go up there and get us introduced. And that's when I took a cover I did. My very first cover that actually was printed, called Walk Don't Run by the Ventures. It was a black and white cover where a guy is walking down the street with a guitar. And I showed it, John was standing up on stage and I was shit scared. I thought he might hit me. I don't know. I didn't know that you can speak to those people, So I talked to John and said, I've got this cover, what do you think of it? And he said, go to Stuart, he's the arty one. So he pushed me to Stuart. And from that moment on, we were meeting wherever it could. They were hungry for all the information they could get about the French music, about French art in particular, like Jean Cocteau. Or they were so open to everything. In particular, Stuart, of course, he was really learning art. He was painting, and that's how we got in contact and spent a lot of time. Paul too was excited.
As somebody who knew them well and was friends with them, once they became enormously successful, and then they became the smart one, the cute one, the funny one, the quiet one, I'm imagining you saw them in much different ways than how everybody else saw them.
Well, for example, that's the strongest example. Everybody thought George was the quiet one. He was called the quiet Beatle, which is completely silly. He was sarcastic. He could be very bitty humor. It was not that sort of a person at all. But he was not up for, like a Paul, who was being very polite to the audience and speaking and making the contact. That wasn't his thing, In particular, when he went down to television or stuff, he never was that sort of a person.
And then in roughly 1965, the Beatles were certainly almost at the peak of their powers. They asked you to do the cover work for their album coming up. How did you respond to that?
Well, The first time John called me, I was completely overawed. You know, it was just so amazing that they asked me to even thinking about maybe doing a cover for them. That was just very, very heavy for me. It was difficult to accept that fact. But it went a little easier when he said, come down to the studio and listen to the tracks. And that was sort of the key to getting down to it. And I was, of course, expecting that I would say I want something like this and that, but nothing like that happened. I listened to the music, and then I was there and had to come up with an idea.
And they were doing very different kinds of music for Revolver than what they had done prior to that. So did that influence how you created this cover?
It was very, very difficult because the music was really overwhelming, and I was, at the time, I was just too much, really, and I thought, oh, this is too much for the standard Beatles fan who was used to little love songs, you know, and all their hits and stuff. But suddenly you had just the most amazing music, and the lyrics were difficult, not easy to digest.
She said, I know what it's like to be dead.
So I had the job to do a cover for that, and that's what I tried to incorporate. I could do it black and white. I thought the idea was great because everything else was color, so I did black and white.
What were you trying to convey with this cover artwork?
Well, to convey was definitely the fact in which you can see on the cover, and I think that's why it was so successful too, is that you have all this hair. New hair is really, really important, and the fact that they had hair on their forehead and stuff was like a completely new thing. Normally the people had shaved their heads and had normal hairstyle, and this was sensational. It was really very, very important at the time. And at the same time, important was that the fans had something to look at. So I put lots of pictures on it, as many pictures as I could possibly put on it that still would look good, so that the fans could see their Beatles. That was important.
And did the Beatles like what you came up with?
Oh, they loved it. They saw the first sketch I showed them, and then I was happy, and I knew I'm going to do the cover, and they all loved it.
And you've got a book out now that details the creation of this cover and a lot of your early life and career with the Beatles. Tell me a little bit about why you decided to make that book and what fans can expect to see from what you came up with in the book.
Well, it is the year of 50 years ago this cover and the music was done. And it is natural that people are celebrating this moment, and that's why I decided to do a graphic novel. That's how it really started, that I said I wanted to do a graphic novel because I want the people not to just have a story being told. I wanted to be able for the people to really get involved as much as it's possible. And that's why I did drawings. I did a graphic novel. If anybody knows what graphic novel is, that is what people call a comic. But I'm not doing Superman or Batman or not Donald Duck. It's a different type of, but it's telling a story not with words, but mainly with illustration. Of course, a few words too. But the graphic novel is from the first time John called me to do the cover, and going through, showing them the sketches, then going home and working on it and wrecking my brains. How am I going to do this? And I couldn't get George's face right, so I cut out all these photos. So that was the main problem, and the main thing I wanted to be in that graphic novel to the very end. That they liked the cover and looked at it and stuff, and that's the main part of it.
And as most folks know, you also picked up bass, and you've played with the Beatles as solo artist as well as with Manfred Mann, and you've been on other very successful records. Are you still playing bass and very active artistically these days?
No, I don't play anymore. Once I moved to Germany, it became very difficult because I had so many great musicians like Jim Keltner or Dr. John, and some people are dead already, and had such a good time. The songs were so good, and then I was in Germany. I didn't see any reason to spoil all my memories.
Thank you to Klaus Voormann for taking the time to chat with me. His new book, Birth of an Icon, Revolver 50, is available online at Voormann.com.